Hey guys, Matthew. In today's video, I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys the strategy that I used in order to earn my Headhunter in the first 2 days of a league. Now, before I start the video, I want to say a few things. First off, this was done completely solo. I did not have help from anybody, no one buying or selling my things, no services being done. This was all entirely from just blasting some maps. And second off, I want to say that this could have been significantly faster. This took me around 36 hours of playtime in order to be able to afford this. So as you can see, I've played a lot already, but I think that within 24 hours of league starting, if you were to just not sleep and just play for 24 straight hours, this can be done with somebody with very good planning and of course very good execution and nothing going wrong along the way with some pretty regular RNG. I don't think there's anything too crazy there. Okay, now that I mentioned that, I do want to say also that you definitely should not be comparing yourself to me or any of the other people, like content creators who play this game for a living. We all play like considerably unhealthy amount of time. So I would say compare yourself to yourself. Use these videos from people like me in order to learn more about the game, and also in order to learn the way that we go about figuring out, the strategies that we'll use to make currency. But then compare yourself to your previous leagues and work towards your own goals. Okay, now that I've mentioned all this, let's get into the fun part of the video. So first off, the strategy is not going to require you much atlas completion at all. I think 60-70 is probably going to be plenty, so that's pretty good. In the description, there's going to be a link to the bare minimum tree that you should have in order to be doing this strategy, and there's going to be another one to the recommended if you're able of doing T14 plus maps. If you're not able to do T14 plus maps, just do the bare bones tree. It doesn't really matter. Now, of course, when I say T14 plus maps, I mean T14 plus 60% Delirium maps, as this strategy is all about Delirium Orbs. So, I'm going to explain quickly the idea behind it, and then, of course, the strategy itself. So it all resolves around Delusions of Persecution, which gives you encounters that are 100% more likely to spawn unique bosses. Now, this is Omni and Kosis. For those who don't know, every 1% chance of Delirium on your map is a 1% chance for those bosses to spawn. So if you have 20% Delirium, you have a 20% chance for each of those bosses to be there, and they are treated, individually. So what we want to get is 40% on our maps minimum, which is going to give us an 80% chance for these bosses to spawn. Now, Kosis only spawns in red tier maps, T11 and above. So we want to be doing 40% T11 plus maps in order for this strategy to really shine. Now, 40% is going to give us 1.6 bosses per map on average. Meanwhile, 60%, if we can manage, is going to guarantee 2 bosses every single map with this node. So if you're doing any sort of Delirium content, this is definitely something that you would want to have, as long as you are doing less than 100%. If you're doing 100% daily map, this is kind of useless, as you already have, a 100% chance to get both bosses. Now, we are also getting 50% increase of Simulacrum Splinters and 50% chance to drop unique Cluster Jewels. Now, this 50% increase of Simulacrum Splinters is not massive, but it means that instead of dropping, say, 12 Splinters, they'll drop 18, which does add up to an extra 12 Splinters per map, which definitely adds up to a little bit, few chaos every single map, which isn't bad. But what we really care about is the 50% chance to drop unique Cluster Jewels, as there are quite a few Cluster Jewels of the unique ones that are very good early on. Gitava's Teachings being over an X. This league, the Interrogation was like 4 to 5x, and it still is. Lone Wolf, Hollow Palm being almost an X each in the early stages of the league. Now, of course, these all go down. Currently, the Interrogation is the only one remaining that is really expensive. But I would say that overall, still, this is definitely worthwhile going for this node, as the increase in Simulacrum Splinters more than makes up for it. These Simulacrum Splinters pretty much make up for the entirety of the cost of the map, the Delirium Orbs, and everything else. So you'll start with T11 plus on the Delirium, T11 plus 40%, and you'll work your way up to T16s. Now, when you're comfortably doing T16s 40%, I would say go up to 60% Delirium, but you'll probably have to go back down to say T13s, T14s. I would say T14s is pretty much the go-to if you're doing 60%. And then as you're comfortable in T14s, go up to T15s, and then eventually T16s 60%, and this is the end game, if you will, for the strategy, as that's pretty much where it caps out, as where you have both bosses. And since you're running T16s, they have increased simulacrum splinters. For those who don't know, the higher the map tier, the more simulacrum splinters you get, both from regular mods but also from the bosses. So it's really important that you're able to do higher tier. Now, otherwise, we are basically getting all of the free juice that we can get that has, very minimal investment in high returns. So we're getting a free Harbinger, and then we're juicing it up with the King Harby and the 60% more minions, even if we don't get the King Harby. And then the real kicker is Abyss. This league is nuts. Now we're getting Abyssal Army for 100% increased monsters, 30% from these 2 nodes, and 30% from these 3 nodes, for a total of 2.6 times more monsters, basically, than usual in your Abyss, which is insane. The amount of monsters that are coming out of Abysses this league is just crazy. It fills up your entire screen, which is why we're going to be using a very cheap 2 Chaos Xana mod or Kirak mod, and this is essentially what we're going to be doing in order to maximize the value of our Delirium Orbs, and it is more than enough. I was not running Sextants because I didn't have Void Stones. I was not running Scarabs because I was too lazy to actually try to buy them. I was not even running Master Missions. Now, I will say that you definitely want to run either Searing Exarch or the Eater of Worlds, as it is going to not really turn up into much currency too much, but it does add some more monsters to your map, which means more Simulacrum Splinters, more chances at big drops, and of course, once in a while, you get to fight the bosses, and the bosses don't have too much that they can drop, but they will drop, additional currencies, the Eldritch currencies and whatnot, which does add up a little bit over time. I had sold everything myself, and for example, you can look, and this is what I farmed in about a day of doing these maps. So it does add up. There's probably about an X or so, maybe a little bit more worth of currency in here, which is not awful, as it doesn't really cost anything, and it does add more monsters, which also means more Simulacrum Splinters. Okay, now other than that, let's talk about pretty much the final thing that comes into the strategy, right? Because it's very simple. We're taking the map, adding 40 or 60% Delirium, T14 and above, hopefully, if we can manage. Otherwise, T11 is perfectly fine. We're getting Delusions of Persecution, no Scarabs, no Sextants. Now let's talk about which Delirium Orb do you want to be putting on, because there's definitely some better ones. So what I did is I looked at the search here, asterisk, which is basically telling the API anything with this. So anything that is considered a Delirium Orb. And then you would search this. Now I was buying these for 5C each. Now they have gone up in price. They're about 8C-ish now. There's still some for 5, but most of them are going to be 6, 7, 8 Chaos. So they've gone up in price by about 50%. But Exalts have also gone up from 70 to 100C, and Simulacrums have gone up from 1x to 1.2. So now Simulacrums are about 120C. Meanwhile, they used to be 70, and the Orbs are 7 or so, and they used to be 5. So basically, it's the same thing. You're getting just about the same amount of value per map. And this is the cool thing about the strategy of this league. There's a large supply of Delirium Orb due to the fact that they drop from the league mechanic. And because there's such a large supply, they can't really go up in price as long as people are supplying them, right? Because even if there's a lot of demand, if they're dropping for the regular league mechanic and not things like Heist and things that are not used, not farmed as much, it makes it very, very strong. And Simulacrums are always going to have really high demand because, a lot of people want to farm them. They're super, super lucrative if you can manage to actually do them successfully. Okay, so let's talk about which one of the orbs, right? Because, yeah, there's a lot of them that are cheap, but which ones do you want to focus on? Now, I would say that Amorphous is pretty good. It drops you to Catalyst, which, you don't get a ton of them, but they do add up, pretty quickly. I would say that Cartographers is definitely one of the better ones. But only if you're doing T16s. It will help you farm your preferred map more so than any other because you'll have such a supply in map. It'll also drop you Sextants, which are pretty valuable. It'll also drop you Guardian maps, right? Any of the Elder, Shaper, or Conqueror maps. So very, very good when it comes to Cartos. However, pretty much more expensive and requires you to be able to do T16 maps. So anything below that, I would not do this. Diviners are pretty okay overall. They'll drop you mostly just stack decks, but they can also drop you other stuff as well. I believe I've gotten a nurse from this, and I opened up my stack decks, and from a stack of 110, I got a doctor, 2 alluring abyss, and a nurse. So that was about a kick of 10x or so in currency, just thrown into my economy, which definitely helped me out when it came to buying my Headhunter. Saved me probably something like 2 or 3 hours. So that was pretty cool. Find is typically very good, or at least pretty good, but the problem with Find Delirium Orbs is that they're typically being used up by groups, so as a solo player, it's harder to buy them, as they're more expensive or more in demand, but they'll pay for themselves with pure currency, which is nice. Foreboding is kind of okay. It's not amazing. It's definitely like middle of the pack. I would definitely buy it though if it's as cheap as some of the other ones. Fragmented is definitely not bad either. Probably somewhere around the middle of the pack. It drops you a lot of Azeri fragments, which are sold in bulk, especially early, as a lot of people are farming for the boots. But it also can drop you mortal fragments, and I'm pretty sure that's about it. I don't think it really drops some of the shaper fragments or anything like that very often, if it does at all. Imperial is definitely one that I would say is one of my favorite ones, especially early on in the league. Yesterday I was buying these for 5C each, and every time I would drop an offering, it would sell for 4C. So a single offering in my map would just about pay for the orb, and I was getting like 4 or 5 plus offerings per map, so the profit margins were insane. I would say I easily made over 10x plus with this. Of course, the price of the offerings matters a lot here. Obscurity, again, pretty much middle of the pack. Singulars are pretty bad. But if you hit something big, you could technically get a Mage Blood, a Headhunter, whatever. So there's definitely some potential there. But from one map to the next, you're not going to be seeing much in terms of returns. Now, skittering is definitely the best orb in the game by far. The issue with skittering is that it requires you to get a lot of juice on your maps. If you're only getting 7 or 8 bars of loot in your Delirium maps, this is not going to be worth it. You'll definitely want to be aiming for 10 plus to make skitterings actually worthwhile. So that's what I would say. It's typically also going to be used up by groups more often than not. So it's hard to buy these as a solo player when you're mapping and then buying the orbs between the maps, which means you can only have access to the supply which hasn't been bought out already. And Thaumaturge is definitely another good one. It drops you a lot of 20% quality gems, which can be vendored to 1-to-1 for GCPs, but it also drops you 2120 gems, and it can drop you things like Enlighten, Empower. I personally got Enlighten and Empower from this, and I really didn't run that many, so I would say this is definitely a very solid one. And then Timeless is kind of whatever. It mostly drops you Incubators, which can be okay to incubate your own gear, but it's definitely not a priority for me. And then Whispering for Essences is also not much of a priority. I would say it's kind of okay. Now, I think there's also the Calgren one for the Expedition, but I don't know if it doesn't exist or it's just really expensive, but I personally have not bought a single one of those. But yeah, that's mostly it for the strategy. I mean, it's very simple stuff, again, and it can be set up very, very quickly in your Atlas progression, and then you can kind of just ride the wave of currency and keep upgrading your character in order to be able to do harder and harder, and eventually you'll want to, fill up the top part, as they're quite decent, right? The Conqueror gives you unique bosses have 25% chance to get a Conqueror map, so that's going to add up over time. The Synth maps is pretty good, and of course the Shaper and Elder Guardian maps, 4% is also pretty good. Once you have everything, basically every 5 or so maps, you'll be getting one of the Guardian or Conqueror maps, and that's about 5C per map or so, 4 to 5C per map average, which again almost pays up for Delirium Orb. Now, one thing to mention though is that you're not running maps very quickly. They'll take you about 10 to 15 minutes or so per map, so it's definitely very time consuming, and the looting is also quite long. But it's very, very lucrative, and I mean, it allowed me to purchase a Headhunter within probably about 12 hours of farming in my entire play session. There's a lot of it which was just messing around. I was doing red tier maps with 30 all res. I was just too lazy to upgrade my gear. There's a lot of things that I did wrong, which is why I think that this can be done significantly faster. Okay, that's pretty much all I have for this strategy in this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and hopefully those who decide to go for the strategy are going to have similar results. Before I go, as always, I do want to say a huge thank you to my supporters. So Jacob, Alex, Max, Hamad, Raskorl, Brandon, welcome back. Thomas, Nike, the Great Master, Alex, the other Alex, Tim, Mercury, Johnny, Gary Fish, Nailed, the Arsonist, and Bidzin, as well as, of course, anybody else who's supported me in the past and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully you guys are having a great league start, a great league overall, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.